There is a phrase in Terran military doctrine that our translation matrices kept flagging as corrupted data. Not because the syntax was broken. Because the meaning made no structural sense. We will not be asking again. We ran it through 17 linguistic frameworks. Cross-referenced it against 400 years of documented human conflict. Fed it into our predictive aggression models, which are, I should note, considered the most sophisticated threat assessment tools in the known galaxy. Every model returned the same output, bluff probability, 94.7%. I remember reading that figure. I remember thinking, good. I remember what came next. This is not the story of how humanity defeated the galactic sovereignty. That framing would imply a battle, a front, a moment of martial glory that both sides could point to and say, there, that is where it turned. There was no such moment. There was only a sequence of events that, in retrospect, follows a logic so obvious it feels like we deserved what happened for not seeing it coming. I am Logistics Subcommander Vetho Karanile of the Sovereignty 9th Coordination Fleet. I have served 31 years. I have managed the supply chains of 4 pacification campaigns, 2 territorial expansions, and 1 event that is still classified in 12-member systems under a designation that roughly translates to administrative incident. I kept logs of everything. Compulsively. To a degree my superiors considered a personality defect and, my therapist called a response pattern. What follows are those logs. Timestamp verified. Cross-referenced. Annotated. Make of them what you will. But, I would ask you to pay particular attention to the human. Not the armies. Not the admirals. Not the political theater that burned across the newscasts of 40 civilizations. Just the one human. Sergeant Mara Voss. I never learned her rank properly. Humans have a baroque system of titles that shifts depending on who's threatening whom. But, I learned her name. I learned her face. I learned the particular sound she made when she was calculating something terrible and had just finished calculating it. It sounds like a laugh. It isn't. Begin log. Day 1. They were supposed to stand down. They were very clear that they had heard us. That's what made it worse. I will confess something that is not in my official report. The morning the stand-down order was issued, I was in the secondary commissary on Deck 7, arguing with a vending interface about the temperature of my nutrient broth. The machine insisted it had dispensed broth at the correct thermal range. I insisted it had not. We had reached an impasse. I was, by my own admission, more emotionally invested in this argument than in the briefing that had concluded 40 minutes prior, in which Fleet Admiral Dos Herren had announced that humanity's 12-system cluster had been formally served with a sovereignty compliance notice, the diplomatic equivalent of a loaded weapon placed quietly on a table. The briefing had taken 23 minutes. My argument with the vending machine took 31. I include this detail not because it is relevant to what followed, but because I want you to understand the texture of that morning. The ordinariness of it. The way the universe does not announce itself. We were not at war. We were administering. There is a distinction. Sovereignty doctrine is very clear on this, between military engagement and compliance enforcement. Engagement implies 2 parties with competing claims. Enforcement implies 1 party with authority and another party who has not yet understood their situation. Humanity had not yet understood their situation. That was the consensus. That was almost universally agreed upon. I logged it at 9.14, consensus, Terrans will comply within standard notification window. Probability assessment, 91.2%. Dissenting voice, none filed officially. Unofficially, Lieutenant Priel made a face. I have noted the face. It was not a confident face. The compliance notice itself was, and I reviewed the original text, because this matters, not aggressive in tone. I want to be precise here. It did not threaten annihilation. It did not invoke sovereignty military superiority in explicit terms. It outlined, in measured legal language, the administrative framework by which humanity's independent trade routes through the Karelian corridor would be reclassified as sovereignty-managed channels, subject to tariff, inspection, and operational oversight. It noted that non-compliance would constitute a breach of the accession protocols that humanity had technically, somewhat reluctantly, signed 17 years prior. It was, in the parlance of sovereignty diplomacy, the polite version. There were less polite versions. I had seen them used. They contained different language, larger fleets, and a phenomenon my colleagues called geological persuasion. We sent the polite version because, and I remember this being said in the briefing, said with a confidence that now makes my secondary stomach clench, because humanity was small. 12 systems. Barely post-expansion. Their military budget was a rounding error in the sovereignty's quarterly logistics accounting. Their most advanced warships were things our destroyers would classify as escort vessels. The polite version was a courtesy. A professional gesture. The equivalent of knocking before you come in. We knocked. Humanity answered. The response came in 48 hours. 48 hours is, in sovereignty diplomatic timekeeping, extraordinarily fast, typically taken as a sign of either eagerness or panic, both of which are manageable states. The message was brief. I have it memorized, because I have read it approximately 900 times since. It read, the Terran Federated Systems acknowledges receipt of Sovereignty Compliance Notice 7-441 Karelian. We understand the terms. We understand the intent. We are asking you, respectfully, to withdraw it. We will not be asking again. That was it. No counter-proposal. No legal challenge. No invocation of the 17 subsections of the accession protocols that humanity's lawyers had apparently spent considerable time annotating. We knew about those annotations, our intelligence services had flagged them 3 months prior and concluded they were probably posturing. Just, we understand. We are asking. We will not ask again. I logged it at 14.07 on day 2. I noted, Terran response non-compliant. Tone, unclear. Posturing probability per intelligence assessment, 94.7%. Recommend, proceed with enforcement timeline. Personal note, the phrase we will not be asking again is structurally unusual. It is not a threat. It is not a refusal. It is a, I don't have a category for this. I am creating a new log category, undefined signal. This is its first entry. Lieutenant Prielsedo, who had come to stand beside me while I was reading, said, that's a strange thing to write. I said, intelligence says it's a bluff. She made the face again. Fleet Admiral Das Herren's response to the Terran message was measured, professional, and, in my personal assessment, slightly too loud for the size of the room we were in. He said, and, I am paraphrasing slightly because the official transcript has been redacted in 4 places, they are 12 systems. We are 400. Proceed. Proceed meant, advance the enforcement fleet to the Karelian corridor entry point. Establish a customs checkpoint. Begin processing Terran vessels. Not blocking them, processing them. Inspections. Fees. The administrative weight of the sovereignty, applied gently and, without violence, like a hand placed on a shoulder that happens to be attached to an arm that happens to be significantly larger than yours. I filed the procurement requests for the checkpoint station components. I coordinated the logistics rotation for the 3 cruisers assigned to corridor oversight. I updated my standing inventory of the staging platform's fuel reserves, which were 7% below optimal and had been 7% below optimal for 6 months because the contractor responsible for the resupply was in a billing dispute with the 9th Fleet's accounting division, and I had submitted 14 escalation requests, all of which were acknowledged and none of which had resulted in fuel. I was thinking about the fuel when the first report came in from the corridor. Log entry 004, day 4 a timestamp, 7.441.14 status, updating the Terran vessel Meridian Cross, a mid-class hauler, registered civilian, carrying agricultural processing equipment, had been flagged for inspection at the new Karelian checkpoint. Standard procedure. The crew was informed of the inspection requirement. The inspection team boarded. The inspection took 6 hours. 6 hours is not standard. Standard is 40 minutes. I noted this. When I requested a status report from the inspection team leader, the response I received was 3 sentences long and contained, in my assessment, an unusual amount of hedging for a routine status report. Inspection ongoing. Cargo manifests are extensive. The crew is being cooperative. Being cooperative. That specific phrasing. I logged it and flagged it undefined signal, second entry, and went back to the fuel dispute, because I had priorities and I was trying to maintain them. 6 hours became 8. 8 became 12. At hour 14, the inspection team leader filed a formal request for a second inspection team. I escalated this to Commander Valoran, who escalated it to Fleet Admiral Das Herren, who said, and this is in the official transcript, unreacted, it's one civilian hauler. Handle it. The second inspection team reported in at hour 19. Their lead inspector's name was Sub-Officer Creeth. He was a 20-year veteran of sovereignty customs enforcement. He had processed, by his own career record, over 12,000 vessels. He was not, by any account available to me, a person given to exaggeration or dramatic framing. His report said, the cargo manifest for the Meridian Cross lists 4,847 individual line items. We have verified 4,846. Item 4,847 is listed as miscellaneous agricultural components, assorted. The physical volume of the assorted category does not match the listed dimensions. We have requested clarification from the crew. The crew has provided documentation. The documentation lists 4,848 sub-items within item 4,847. We have verified 4,847. Sub-item 4,848 is listed as miscellaneous fasteners and connectors, agricultural application, assorted. We have requested the specific inventory of sub-item 4,848. The crew has provided a supplementary document. It is 340 pages. We are working through it. The crew has offered us food. It was, I want to note this for the record, genuinely good. I don't know what they called it. I ate 2 portions. I am professionally embarrassed by this. I read that report at my station on Deck 7. I had just received my nutrient broth, which was, for the first time in recorded memory, the correct temperature. I didn't drink it. I sat with Sub-Officer Creeth's report and I felt something I did not have an immediate name for. It wasn't alarm. It wasn't recognition. It was the specific sensation of a pattern assembling itself just below the threshold of visibility, the way a shape in fog becomes clear not when you look at it directly but when you look slightly to the side. I opened a new log entry. I wrote, the Meridian Cross is one ship. There are currently 47 Terran vessels flagged for inspection in the Karelian queue. I am going to pull the cargo manifests on all 47. I pulled them. Each manifest averaged 3,200 line items. The shortest was 847 lines. The longest was 11,000 lines, and it was carrying, according to its primary listing, educational materials. I stared at that for a long time. Then, I wrote, they knew we were coming. They knew when. They knew what we'd do. This is not a cargo ship. This is a 47-ship document war, and we are losing it, and Fleet Admiral Das Herren does not know that yet, and I have to decide whether to tell him, and I am going to tell him, and he is going to make the face that is the senior officer version of Lieutenant Prielsato's face, and then, we are going to proceed anyway, because that is what we do. I was right about all of it. The meeting with Fleet Admiral Das Herren lasted 11 minutes. I presented my analysis. The pattern. The timing. The statistical impossibility of 47 civilian haulers independently arriving at the Karelian corridor checkpoint within a 72-hour window with manifests of sufficient complexity to occupy full inspection teams for days. Someone had planned this. Someone had planned it with specificity and advanced knowledge of our enforcement protocols, our inspection procedures, our staffing ratios, and probably our fuel deficit, though I didn't say that last part because it would have raised uncomfortable questions about my 14 unresolved escalation requests. Das Herren listened. He said, "So they've delayed the checkpoint." Clever. I said, carefully, "Yes, sir." Clever. They've effectively occupied our entire inspection capacity with documentation that is technically within compliance. We cannot flag them as non-compliant. We cannot turn them away. We are currently processing a 47-ship queue that will take, at current staffing, approximately 22 days to clear. He said, "Add staff." I said, "The manifest self-generates subcategories upon completion of each inventory tier." Sub-Officer Creeth has been on the Meridian Cross for 27 hours and has cleared approximately 60% of the primary manifest. Upon completing that tier, he was presented with a secondary manifest. It also has subcategories. A pause. Das Herren said, "How deep does it go?" I said, "We don't know yet, sir." He was quiet. I added, because I could not help myself, "The crew continues to offer food. Our inspection teams have, in aggregate, accepted it 14 times. I want that noted. I don't think it's relevant, but I want it noted." He stared at me. I said, "They know exactly what they're doing, sir. This is not passive resistance. This is architecture. They built this before we arrived. That means they had our protocols. It means they have someone inside Ninth Fleet Administration," Das Herren said. Silence. I wrote, on my personal log, at that exact moment, timestamp 7.441.17.33, "He's wrong. They don't need someone inside. They have the accession protocol texts, which are public record, which we wrote, which contain our own inspection procedures in Appendix D, subsection 14, which I myself helped draft 9 years ago, and which I made extremely thorough because I was proud of my thoroughness, and I am beginning to understand that my thoroughness may have been architecturally catastrophic." I did not say this out loud. I said, "Yes, sir. Possibly." He said, "Proceed with enforcement. Add staff. This is a delay tactic. We outlast it." I said, "Yes, sir." I went back to my station. I pulled up the manifest for the vessel listed as carrying educational materials. Item 1 of 11,000, reference texts, agricultural science, general overview, assorted volumes. I scrolled. Item 6,847, reference texts, agricultural science, irrigation subdisciplines, regional application, cross-indexed, bound edition, supplementary appendices included, volumes 1 through 340, with errata. I scrolled further. Item 11,000, miscellaneous. See supplementary manifest. I clicked the link. The supplementary manifest was 23,000 items. I sat back. I thought about Sergeant Marabas, whose name I did not yet know, who was somewhere in that convoy or behind it or ahead of it or possibly all three, doing something that looked like paperwork and was actually something I didn't have a category for yet. I created a new log category. I called it Architecture. On day 8, we cleared the Meridian Cross. Sub-Officer Creeth filed his final report at 3:40 station time, which meant he had been aboard that one civilian hauler for 4 days, 11 hours, and approximately 40 minutes. His report was 46 pages long, which is 39 pages longer than any customs inspection report I have processed in 31 years of service. The final line of his report read, "All items verified. Cargo consistent with manifest. No violations found. Crew provided a meal upon completion." I have included my notes on the meal in Appendix C because I feel it warrants documentation and I am no longer certain what is and isn't relevant on this assignment. I read Appendix C. It was 3 pages long. The meal had been some kind of protein preparation that Creeth described, with increasing linguistic desperation, as simultaneously acidic and sweet in a way that should not be possible, served at a temperature that I believe was deliberately calibrated to be comforting, accompanied by a beverage that I have submitted to our chemistry lab for analysis because the warmth it produced seemed to migrate from the digestive system to the extremities in a physiologically interesting sequence. The chemistry lab's analysis came back: fermented grain derivative, approximately 4.2% ethanol, non-toxic to VEth-class physiology in moderate quantities. No controlled substances detected. Flavor compounds, 47 distinct aromatic compounds, none individually accountable for the subjective experience described by Sub-Officer Creeth. Recommend further study. I flagged this under architecture and moved on. The Meridian Cross cleared the checkpoint. Its cargo, 4,847 verified items of agricultural processing equipment, and one category of miscellaneous fasteners that Creeth had eventually traced through 11 documentation tiers to a single physical box containing, by his count, somewhere between 400 and 600 small metal pieces of varying sizes which are, I am informed by the crew, individually necessary and, collectively non-threatening, was released into sovereignty-managed corridor space. Two things happened the day after the Meridian Cross cleared. First, a new Terran vessel entered the corridor. Second, it had a 14,000-item manifest. I want to describe the mood on HFY platform at this point, because I think it matters. There is a specific quality to the exhaustion of people doing something they know is not working but cannot stop doing. It is different from regular exhaustion. Regular exhaustion is heavy. This kind is brittle. Precise. Everyone moves carefully, as if small sounds might collapse something. Our inspection staff had grown from 12 to 31. They were rotating in 6-hour shifts. The senior customs officers were developing a particular pause before opening a new manifest document, the way a person pauses before looking at their financial records when they already know roughly what they'll find. I had, at this point, logged 847 pages of manifest documentation across 43 vessels. I had identified 31 distinct documentation strategies employed across the Terran convoy, ranging from legitimate complexity, real cargo, genuinely intricate manifests, to what I was categorizing as elegant bureaucratic recursion, documents that referenced other documents that referenced the original document, creating loops that were technically navigable but required hours of cross-referencing to resolve. I had also identified something else. The convoy wasn't just delayed at the checkpoint. The convoy was organizing behind the checkpoint. 13 vessels had cleared inspection in the past 11 days. 13 vessels were now anchored in the staging zone immediately past the checkpoint, which was technically sovereignty-administered corridor space, technically subject to our traffic management, technically something I had authority over. Technically. I had issued 3 traffic advisories asking the cleared vessels to proceed to their destinations. All 3 advisories had received the same response: we acknowledge your advisory. We are experiencing minor navigational calibration requirements. Estimated departure, pending. Pending. I had added a 4th log category, pending. It had 41 entries. I met Sergeant Mara Voss on day 11. I want to be precise about this because in retrospect the meeting has a quality of theater to it that I'm not sure I was fully equipped to recognize in the moment. She was not the captain of any of the vessels in the queue. She was not, as far as I could determine from the crew manifests I had access to, officially attached to any of the Terran ships at all. She appeared on the Kalandara, a mid-class personnel transport that had been anchored in the cleared staging zone for 6 days on account of pending navigational calibration, as a passenger. Her documentation listed her occupation as logistics consultant. Logistics consultant. I read that and I felt something I can only describe as recognition, the specific warmth of understanding a joke slightly after the punchline and finding it funnier for the delay. She requested a meeting with the ranking sovereignty administrative officer at the checkpoint. That was me. I was not the ranking military officer. Commander Valoran held that distinction and was, at the moment of the request, managing a situation involving a Terran cargo ship whose manifest had been filed in a regional Terran dialect that our translation software was handling with approximately 70% accuracy, which meant 30% of the cargo was currently classified as translation pending, category unclear. I took the meeting. She arrived at the checkpoint admin office at 14.30, which I noted because I note everything. I want to be careful here because this is where the official log and my personal log begin to diverge, and I want the divergence on record. Official log, day 11, 14.30, met with Terran Logistics Consultant, identification confirmed. Discussion, general checkpoint operations. Duration, 47 minutes. Outcome, inconclusive. Personal log, day 11, 14.30, she walked in wearing the specific expression of someone who already knows how the next hour goes. Not arrogant about it. Just settled. The way people look when they've done a calculation and the calculation came out clean. She was medium height. Brown hair, cut practically short. She had a small scar on her chin that pulled her smile slightly sideways. Her uniform, because it was a uniform, regardless of what her documentation said, was civilian but pressed in a way that civilians don't bother to press things. She said, "Sub-Commander. Thank you for your time." I said, "You're not a logistics consultant." She said, "No. But I have extensive experience in logistics. Particularly in how it can be used to stop things from moving." And there it was. Not a threat. Not a negotiation opening. Just a statement of the situation, offered plainly, from one professional to another. I logged, internally, the specific quality of her directness. It wasn't aggression. It was efficiency. She was not here to posture. She was here to accomplish something, and her preferred method was apparently being honest about what she was doing in a way that was somehow more unsettling than any deception would have been. I said, "You're going to tell me this ends when the compliance notice is withdrawn." She said, "I'm going to tell you this is the polite version." The polite version. She said it with the specific flat effect of someone returning a phrase to its owner. I want to note, I did not respond immediately. My log shows a 4-second gap at 14.37, between her statement and my next entry. 4 seconds is, for me, an extraordinarily long pause. I am a note-taker. I narrate in real time. 4 seconds of silence in my log means I was not forming words. What I was doing was running the implication. This is the polite version meant, there is a less polite version. There is a less polite version meant, they had built this, the manifests, the queue, the anchored staging zone, the cascading documentation loops, not as their maximum effort, but as their opening courtesy. I thought about the fuel deficit I had been trying to resolve for 6 months. I thought about the 47 vessels currently in the inspection queue. I thought about the cleared convoy anchored in the staging zone, 13 ships that were not going anywhere, that were doing nothing that violated any sovereignty regulation, that were simply present in a location they had every right to be in numbers that happened to coincide precisely with the maximum vessel capacity of the staging zone as defined by sovereignty traffic management protocols that I had also, years ago, helped to draft. They had read our own protocols back to us. They had used our procedures as construction materials. And the woman sitting across from me, who was absolutely a soldier and not a logistics consultant, was telling me, professionally, without malice, that this was the polite version. I said, "What does the less polite version look like?" She said, "You don't want to find out." Then, she said, "But I can tell you what it starts with." I said, "Tell me." She said, "About 6 months ago, your fuel resupply contractor filed a billing dispute with Ninth Fleet Accounting. You know about it. You've escalated it 14 times. I went very still. She said, "The dispute was filed by a company called Orcs Logistics Consolidated. You've probably verified that Orcs is a legitimately registered sovereignty vendor." They are. Their registration is real. Their contract is valid. Their billing dispute is entirely within normal parameters. She paused. She said, "Their parent company is registered in the Terran Federated Systems under a holding structure that takes about 11 steps to trace. We own your fuel contract, Sub-Commander. We've owned it for 4 years. We haven't done anything with that information. Yet, she didn't say. She didn't have to. I logged at 14.41, she just told me they have been inside our supply chain for 4 years. She is telling me this openly, in a meeting I will have to report, because she wants me to report it. She wants Fleet Admiral Dosharan to know. She wants him to understand that the thing he called a delay tactic is not a delay tactic. It is a demonstration. They are showing us the architecture. They are showing us how deep it goes. They are not threatening to collapse it. They are showing us that they could. I looked at her. She was waiting with the patience of someone who had made a calculation and was simply waiting for the numbers to settle. I said, "How long did it take to build this?" She said, "We started planning the day after we signed the accession protocols." 17 years. They had been building for 17 years. I wrote that down. I write everything down. It still felt surreal to write. I said, "The Fleet Admiral will not withdraw the notice based on a demonstration." She said, "I know." I said, "He'll escalate." She said, "I know." I said, "You want him to." And, for the first time since she had walked in, she looked at me with something that wasn't quite a smile and wasn't quite pity and was maybe just the specific expression of someone watching a shape emerge from fog who has been watching that particular fog for a very long time. She said, "Sub-Commander, I want you to think about every supply chain contract in 9th Fleet's operational infrastructure. I want you to think about how many of them you've verified all the way back through the holding structures." I said, "We have verification protocols, you have verification protocols that we helped design," she said. "Through a consulting firm. 8 years ago. The firm is also ours." Silence. She stood. Straightened her not quite civilian jacket. She said, "The Fleet Admiral will do what he needs to do. We'll be here. We have food, we have documentation, and we are, professionally, very patient people." She left. I sat in the admin office for, my log says 9 minutes. It felt longer. I wrote, "I need to verify every supply contract in 9th Fleet operations. This will take time I don't have. I also need to file a report on this meeting. I also need to figure out what to say in that report that conveys the severity of this situation without triggering an escalation that makes it worse. I also need to figure out if makes it worse is even a coherent concept anymore given that worse implies a baseline and I'm no longer confident I know where the baseline is." Also, she left without eating anything, which means she didn't need the social lubricant of shared food, which means she was comfortable, which means she's done this before. Also, my fuel. My fuel is theirs. My nutrient broth machine is almost certainly on a supply chain that I need to stop this line of thinking. I am going to file the report. Then, I am going to get broth. Then, I am going to lie on my bunk and think about the word architecture until I understand it well enough to be afraid of it properly. Log entry 019, day 11 timestamp, 7.441.28 addendum, Fleet Admiral Dosharan received my report at 16.00. He escalated. I noted this. I also noted that Sergeant Voss, I called her Sergeant in my private log from that moment forward, it felt more honest, was still in the staging zone when I checked the manifest at 22.00. She was still there at 6.00 the next morning. The convoy had grown to 19 cleared vessels. The queue had grown to 61. Nobody had said stand down again. They didn't need to. The architecture was saying it for them. On day 18, Fleet Admiral Dosharan requested a full audit of 9th Fleet supply chain contracts. I want to document what that decision cost, because the official record will not. It cost 42 administrative staff, pulled from other functions. It cost 19 days of capacity in the fleet's legal compliance division. It cost, in currency I cannot fully quantify, the specific confidence that comes from believing your infrastructure belongs to you, but confidence that, once gone, makes the ordinary act of receiving a supply shipment feel vaguely like accepting food from a stranger. What the audit found, 11 contracts with traceable Terran holding structures, confirmed. 7 contracts with possible Terran holding structures, inconclusive. 31 contracts flagged for further review. And, 1 contract, 1 singular, unremarkable service contract for maintenance of the environmental regulation systems on decks 4 through 9 of HFY platform, that had been, per the audit, operating for 9 years, renewed automatically, never reviewed, and, was registered to a company that didn't technically exist in any directory we could access but had a payment routing number that resolved, after 17 banking intermediaries, to an address in the Terran Federated Systems. That was, specifically, a sporting goods supply warehouse in a mid-sized city called Omaha. I logged this at length. I don't know why the specificity of Omaha struck me. Something about the plainness of it. A warehouse in Omaha, maintaining the air I breathed on Deck 7, for 9 years, without my knowledge. I noted in my personal log, I have been breathing their air. This is probably a metaphor. I am going to treat it as literal for now because the literal version is more manageable. The escalation Dosharan had ordered on Day 11 was a formal military posture shift. 2 additional cruisers redirected to the corridor. A priority signal to Sovereignty High Command requesting authorization to declare the Carillion corridor situation a compliance emergency, which is a classification that enables, in brief, more direct measures. High Command sat on the request for 4 days. In those 4 days, the convoy grew to 31 cleared vessels in the staging zone. The inspection queue held steady at 63, because, and this is the part one want documented, the queue was self-sustaining. New vessels entered at roughly the rate that cleared vessels exited. The mathematics were elegant in a way that made me feel something uncomfortable, like finding out the person you've been arguing with has been going easy on you. High Command authorized the compliance emergency on Day 15. The cruisers moved into position. The convoy did not move. I need to describe what happened at 9.30 on Day 16 carefully, because the official account is technically accurate and completely wrong about what it means. The official account says, 2 Sovereignty cruisers took up position at the Carillion corridor staging zone and issued formal dispersal orders to the assembled Terran vessels. The vessels did not comply. A standoff ensued lasting approximately 4 hours, at which point the Sovereignty vessels withdrew to a holding position outside the staging zone. That is true. What it does not capture is the sequence. The dispersal order was issued at 9.30. Standard protocol. Move or be moved. At 9.31, Sergeant Voss, who was still aboard the Kalandara, who had been there for 15 days, who had requested and received 17 platform-to-vessel communication sessions with me during that time, ostensibly to discuss administrative processing timelines and, actually to have conversations I have logged in full and, which constitute the most strategically instructive dialogues of my career, transmitted a single message to the cruiser Heshdabar Ascendant. The message said, "This is Terran Federated Systems Logistics Specialist Voss. I want to make sure you're aware that the station you're currently drawing power from for your tertiary weapons array calibration has its grid management contract held through Meridian Cross Logistics Group, which I believe you'll find in your own procurement records. I'd hate for there to be any confusion about that during a sensitive operational moment." Silence from the Ascendant for 11 minutes. Then, a request to HFY Platform Admin to me, specifically asking for verification of the Meridian Cross Logistics Group contract status. I looked it up. Meridian Cross Logistics Group, real company, real contract, grid management services for corridor tactical stations, signed 6 years ago, automatically renewed, never flagged. Parent company of Meridian Cross Logistics Group, 3 holding layers. I got through 2 of them before I knew what I was going to find. 3rd layer, a registered entity in the Terran Federated Systems. Registered city, Omaha. I want to be honest about my mental state at this point in the log, because I think it is relevant to understanding what happened next. I was not panicking. I want to be clear about that. I was doing the sovereignty administrative equivalent of standing very still in a room where I had just noticed that several of the walls were, in fact, not walls. I transmitted the verification to the Ascendant. I also transmitted it to Fleet Admiral Dosharan. I also wrote it in my personal log 6 times in a row because sometimes repetition makes things real and I needed this to be real before I could process it. The power grid management for our tactical stations in the corridor is a Terran contract. The air systems on decks 4 through 9 are a Terran contract. The fuel resupply is a Terran contract. The inspection software we are using to clear their vessels was designed using consultancy inputs from a firm we have since identified as Terran Connected. We built the checkpoint with their tools. We are running the checkpoint on their power. We are breathing their air while we do it. I logged at 10.14, this is what she meant by architecture. Not the manifests. Not the convoy. Those are furniture. The architecture is load-bearing. You don't notice load-bearing walls until you try to remove one. The 4-hour standoff ended when Fleet Admiral Dos Herren ordered the cruisers to a holding position. He did not issue a withdrawal order. He did not rescind the compliance emergency. He ordered a holding position, which is a classification that means, in sovereignty military doctrine, we are pausing to assess. I have processed a great deal of language in 31 years. I have never seen pausing to assess used on a situation the Fleet Admiral considered resolved. I requested a meeting. He gave me 7 minutes. I laid out the full picture. Not just the supply chain data, I had been building a comprehensive map since day 11, cross-referencing every infrastructure contract against the holding structure profiles we had developed from the initial audit. The map was incomplete. I estimated I had identified roughly 60% of the Terran-connected contracts. 60%. And, I had found 60% while operating on the assumption that I was looking. For 9 years before that, I had not been looking. The other 40% was still out there, in the infrastructure of 9th Fleet operations, in the ordinary unseeable machinery of a bureaucracy that had never thought to check. I showed Dos Herren the map. He was quiet for a long time. I said, "Sir, I want to be precise about what this does and does not tell us. It tells us they have significant infrastructure access. It does not tell us they have weaponized that access. They have not disrupted operations. They have not interfered with any system. They have demonstrably had the capability to do so for years, and they have not." He said, "Why not?" I said, "I believe they're telling us something." He said, "They're telling us they can." I said, "Yes. But, they're also telling us they'd rather not." Silence. I said, "The convoy has been in the staging zone for 15 days. The queue has been running for 22. Our staff is exhausted. Our cruisers are holding. And, in that entire time, not one Terran vessel has fired a weapon, jammed a signal, cut a power line. Not one. They have had every opportunity and the apparent capability." Dos Herren said, "What are you recommending, Sub-Commander?" I said, "I'm recommending we understand what they actually want." I met with Sergeant Voss for the 18th time at 14.00 on day 22. She had, over our various meetings, developed the habit of bringing a small thermos of something that I had, after extensive internal debate, started accepting on day 14. The chemistry lab had cleared it as non-toxic. It was warm. It migrated. I was not going to try to explain this to my therapist. She poured 2 portions. She slid one across the table without comment. I took it without comment. This is what passing through crisis together does to professional boundaries. I said, "The Fleet Admiral wants terms." She said, "We sent our terms 3 weeks ago." I said, "Withdrawal of the compliance notice." She said, "Yes." I said, "That's it. That's all of it." She said, "The corridor stays open. Our contracts stay our contracts. No sovereignty oversight of our trade routes. That's the agreement as written. We don't want territory. We don't want political representation in high command. We don't want to renegotiate the accession protocols." She paused. "We want to be left alone." I said, "And, if the notice is withdrawn? The convoy clears." She said, "The convoy clears. The queue clears. The staging zone opens. Everything goes back to operational normal within 48 hours. I said, "And, the contracts?" She said, "Stay where they are." I said, that's non-negotiable." She said, "Yes." I said, "You're leaving infrastructure in place. Inside our operations. After all of this." She said, "We've had infrastructure inside your operations for 17 years, Sub-Commander. We didn't use it. We're not going to use it." I said, "How do we know that?" She said, "You don't. She picked up her thermos. She said, "But, you know what happens if you try to remove it? You've seen the audit. You know what's load-bearing." She was right. I wrote that in my log at 14.47, just those 3 words, and then I sat with them for a while. The alternative to accepting the terms was not military victory. It was not a clean enforcement action that restored sovereignty authority and set a useful precedent. The alternative was a protracted dismantling of our own infrastructure, a process that would take years, that would be visible to every other system watching this situation, that would demonstrate not sovereignty strength but sovereignty dependency. It would show that we had been unknowingly maintained, for nearly 2 decades, by the civilization we were trying to administer. The withdrawal of the compliance notice would show weakness. The alternative would show something worse. Das Herren signed the withdrawal at 17.30 on day 22. I logged it at 17.31. I noted, the convoy is beginning to clear. 48 hours estimated to full operational normalization. The queue is processing its last 12 vessels. Sub-Officer Creeth has been reassigned to standard customs duties and has requested, formally, a culinary advisory rating for his personnel file on the grounds of accumulated field experience. I have forwarded this to HR without comment. High Command is framing this as a diplomatic resolution. The language will be in the official record. I have noted my disagreement with the framing in a document that I will file and, which will be read by no one important and, retained by me forever. The situation was not resolved. The situation was recognized. There is a difference. Sergeant Voss transmitted a final message to my station at 22.00 on day 22. It was not addressed to 9th Fleet Administration or to the Sovereignty Checkpoint Authority. It was addressed to me, by name. It said, "Sub-Commander. Thank you for the professional courtesy. The broth was terrible, for the record. I don't know how you drink it. I've included the recipe for what we were serving. The 47th aromatic compound is cardamom. It took your lab 9 days to find it. That's not a criticism, cardamom is very subtle. Take care of yourself." I read it 3 times. I didn't respond. I opened a new log entry and I wrote for a long time about the audit, about the architecture, about the flavor compound that took 9 days to identify because it was very subtle and nobody had been looking for it. About the specific quality of a threat that doesn't threaten. About the difference between capability and use, and what it means when an adversary has one and declines the other, and whether the declination is mercy or message or both. I wrote, they built something 17 years ago and they built it to last. They built it hoping they would never use it. They used it as little as possible. They stopped the moment we heard them. That is either the behavior of a civilization that is genuinely trying not to fight, or it is the behavior of a civilization that is very good at choosing exactly which fight to have. I have been trying to determine which one for 3 weeks. I think the honest answer is, it doesn't matter. Either way, you don't push them again without knowing what else is load-bearing. And, we don't know. We may never know. That's the point. Final log entry, day 23 at timestamp, 7.441.40 convoy cleared. Corridor open. Checkpoint at operational normal. The vending machine on deck 7 dispensed my broth at the correct temperature this morning. I don't know if this is a coincidence. I'm going to treat it as a coincidence. I logged it anyway.